Oh, hello. Welcome to Coffee with a Therapist on April 28th of 2023. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about real self-worth and also people-pleasing and just some things that I've seen in my own journey, my client's journey. But before we dig into it, real quick, none of this is to substitute therapy, therapeutic advice. That's not what this is about. I am simply sharing what's worked for me and the way that I see this through my own lens and my educational background. So this is for educational purposes only. Each and every one of us, we're so nuanced that you cannot take advice and just put it out there and have it apply to everybody. So I know that some of you know this, but I just want to make sure this is a disclaimer. If you're working through some of these things, I highly encourage you go see a therapist, go see a licensed professional in your state or jurisdiction, whatever that means. Here in the US, we have to be licensed within our own state to see folks. I'm not currently taking on clients, although I really appreciate the messages about that. And yeah, I just wanted to get that out of the air before I dig in. Hopefully I'll make that shorter in future videos so you guys don't have to listen to me for a minute dragging on about how this is not therapy. But I just want to be clear. So not therapy, just edutainment on YouTube. All right, folks, so let's dig into it. Self-worth. I am a person who came from a background where, whether it was the intention of the people I grew up around or not, I learned to base my self-worth on how good I was, like what I achieved in school, and even like morally how good I was, because I personally grew up in a very religious background. Again, I'm not saying that was the intention of those folks. And when I talk about childhood trauma, I absolutely believe that our mentors and parents are doing the best that they can, given where they're at with their own trauma healing. Hurt people. And it doesn't necessarily make it okay. It doesn't mean that we may not have to have some repair and healing in that journey. And I do think it gives it a broader lens where we're not just like blaming parents and religion and things like that. For our current, like where we're at now and where we struggle with people pleasing and other behaviors that people usually learn from childhood traumatic experiences, or just from like the role that they played as a child and we're trying to survive the dynamics around them. So for me personally, I often thought that what I achieved, even somewhat what I looked like, but that was more based in culture, not the people around me. The people around me were actually pretty chill about what they looked like. The only thing I would say that I learned as a kid was weight was super important. And not to go down that rabbit hole, but that was its own thing and journey. And I know that a lot of people can understand that struggle if they grew up basically in the US culture in the 90s, because in the 90s, we were like glamorizing very, very thin bodies as the ideal, and a very small portion of the population actually naturally and healthfully has that body type. So that was when that we saw the appearance of a lot of eating disorders. Not that culture is the only thing that creates that, but it definitely contributes to it. Okay, tangents aside, people pleasing. And self-worth. I learned my self-worth was based on what I did. And it was interesting, like in my adult journey, if you would ask me if I had high self-esteem, because for the most part, outside of some of my struggles with depression and periods of my life where I wasn't in the greatest of places, I've actually done fairly decently. And with that, I used to think that my self-worth was really, really good. I was like, man, I have really good self-worth, really high self-esteem. I think well of myself. And I didn't realize that that was still contingent on the things that I learned as a kid, as far as like, because I was performing well enough or good enough and I was no longer perfectionistic. I was like, yeah, I have really high self-esteem because I'm no longer a perfectionist, but I still hold myself to this high standard and base my self-worth off of all these external factors. As I've continued my healing journey personally, I've realized how much that was not real, how much that was actually like this false message that I was telling myself that I had this high self-worth, high self-esteem, when really I still was basing it on all these external factors, what I was achieving, how good I was doing. And thankfully, because I did well, I thought I had high self-esteem. However, I started to notice that my self-worth and self-esteem didn't stick around during those moments of rejection or perceived rejection, during those moments where I did struggle with that external validation, or when things were missing or I wasn't doing well. That's when it would waver. And I started to realize, like, I didn't have real, true self-esteem that wasn't based on external factors and validation. And that was really hard to admit at first, honestly, because it's a hard journey as an adult to be like, yeah, I struggle with this. But I think so many people struggle to have what I would call real self-worth, which is, even when I'm not super productive and working my booty off and like doing all these good things, that I still have self-worth. Even when people are upset with me, even when I'm rejected, even when I'm not getting external validation, I truly have a strong foundation of self-worth and self-esteem that is not based on those factors. I think most people don't have that. And I understand, again, culturally, we're even kind of conditioned to like, and rewarded for producing, for doing well, for making money, for going up the ladder in our careers. And so I think a lot of people struggle with that, and they really see their self-worth and their power as like getting those things. And I didn't realize how like I was actually so fragile in those moments where it's like I have power in all these areas, but I'm so fragile when it comes to when I don't have those things or when I am rejected. And in the idea that I would start to cultivate anxiety around losing those things, whatever I was putting my self-worth into. And I see this in my clients too. And so it's really interesting how that anxiety builds. And I think the thing that I want to talk about today is just for us to have a basic understanding that most of us struggle with this, and it's totally okay. And part of my healing journey has been working through childhood trauma and those narratives so that I actually have more and more self-worth and self-esteem that is not based on those external factors. I'm still working on this. I'm not like at that point. I always joke, I'm not like meditating on the hill with goats around me, where I have that unwavering self-worth. I'm still working through these narratives. And I want to share that journey with you because it's so important that we even realize that that's a thing. Because again, I thought I was like, my self-worth, my self-esteem is so good. And it was like, why do I struggle in these other areas? And why do I have anxiety? And why is rejection so hard? And why is my ego so fragile? Like, if you notice, like, you're needing validation in certain areas, or like you're trying to get power from like your position or how much money you have or how pretty you are or whatever it is, that means your ego and your self-worth has got some holes in it. It's got some fragility. And I think the first step is understanding that, being aware of it. Because again, I was not aware. I was like, well, I'm not a perfectionist anymore. And I'm like, well, that's like a little better, right? I'm still giving myself kudos for that part of my journey, but I still had a lot of holes in my self-worth, and I'm still working through those holes. So wanted to throw that out there because I think that a lot of people, when they think about their self-worth and self-esteem, don't recognize the different ways that it shows up in your lives if you're high achieving or high producing, or you have, like, you're fortunate enough to have some of these things that our culture puts out there as like, this is, you know, something you put your worth in. So yeah, so I wanted to put in that piece. And then I also wanted to talk a little bit about people pleasing. And it's related to self-worth, because when we struggle with our self-worth and when we've had certain things happen to us in childhood, many people developed this unconscious method of coping in life that's people pleasing. And it's often if we grew up in an environment where we had some sort of volatility around us, we had a parent that struggled with addiction, if we had people in our lives that were the ones that would get upset and be really angry. And so like, if you're in a family system, typically if you have already very volatile, impulsive people that are angry or whatever, you may develop that people pleasing role, because it's almost like you don't have space to even be somebody who disappoints other people. Like, you don't have space to be the screw up, so to speak, because somebody else in your family is already doing that, if that makes sense. And so sometimes the people pleaser develops those skills to survive certain types of like childhood dynamics, passive aggressiveness. If you have a family that really puts a lot of emphasis on appearances, a lot of people pleasers come from those dynamics. So when our self-worth is based on what our family members think about us and other people, we need them to give us that validation to feel okay. And that's the real heart of people pleasing. I mean, we really have to ask ourselves the question, when we are giving to others, when we're doing things, is it coming from a place of abundance? Like, we feel good, we really want to do that thing. And regardless of if that person thanks us or recognizes the good that we did, will we feel any frustration about that? And again, in my own journey, it was embarrassing to learn how much I was freaking people pleasing the people that I loved, like, and trying to rescue them. And I say people pleasing because like sometimes I was doing stuff and it's not like it would please them, but I was trying to make them feel better or not be in an emotional state that was uncomfortable for me. I'm more of an optimistic person, and that also may be part of my traumatic journey of like, those feelings are hard to feel when they're like icky or whatever. But so when people are in my environment and I'm like super happy-go-lucky, I try to elevate them and bring them to my level. But sometimes I don't do that from the healthiest place. And that's something that I've had to learn and acknowledge about myself. Like, sometimes I just got to let people be in a funk or mad or even mad at me. That has still been something that's really hard that I'm continuing to grow through, and my clients are continuing to grow through. And it is so powerful. Like, our ability to increase our capacity, if we have that history of people pleasing, of letting people be mad at us, letting them be angry in general, letting them be in a funk, and making sure that we're not rescuing when they're not asking for help. I mean, a great example in my own life is like, I would go and I'd know my husband's favorite smoothie. And so if I was getting a smoothie, I would grab one for him, and he wouldn't even ask for one. And I'd bring it home for him, and he wouldn't ever say thank you or like acknowledge it. And to be fair, like, it's just me bringing home this thing, and like, he didn't even ask for it. And sometimes it was kind of weird for him because he's like, well, I just ate. And I remember feeling frustration about him not saying thank you or not acknowledging it. And there's times he's actually gotten better on his end about acknowledgement and thank yous. But at the end of the day, that was on me. Like, he never asked for anything. And there are so many subtle ways that I've learned that I've struggled with this in my own life and how to heal this for myself. Now, it's not a bad thing to like go grab a smoothie for your husband or like go do something nice for other people. I'm not saying like don't do those things. Just be really clear with yourself about why you're doing it and if you have any expectations tied to it. If you do, you may not want to do it, or you may want to like minimize the way that you're doing it, because we have no control over what the other person does, if they do say thank you, if they will be appreciative. And if that's our motive, to be honest, we're kind of being a little bit, I don't like the word manipulative, but we're kind of trying to get something. We're trying to get validation and our own needs met through that. Full circle, that ties to our self-worth. When we have higher self-worth that is not based on other people being happy with us, not based on other people even loving us or being connected to us, that goes a long way. And it makes us more comfortable in our skin. It makes people, or I'll speak for myself, it makes me less wanting to go out of my way to think about them and try to change the emotional state that they're in. And I focus more on me. I focus more on my life. I get my stuff done. I have less guilt. It's a beautiful thing, because typically when we struggle with worth and people pleasing, we also feel a lot of guilt. Like if we don't people please, or when people are upset with us, things like that. So part of this healing journey is also understanding your guilt, being able to tolerate it, knowing that when it comes up, sometimes it's not legitimate. And I know that sounds crazy, but I've had to learn how to tolerate my guilt, because it feels so real. It feels so much like I am responsible for other people if they're unhappy. And especially, I mean, therapists out there, you got to think about this and how your own dynamic, like, did you become a therapist because you get a ton of validation from helping people, right? And so again, I've had to really acknowledge and look at myself and the different ways that I have those parts within me. And I'm willing to acknowledge that with y'all. I don't know if I was always, I mean, gosh, in the past, I would have not been able to acknowledge that because I didn't even see it. So as I've been able to see things, as I've been able to help clients see things, I want to share that with you guys because this may be true for you too. And I encourage you to bring this to a therapist, to journal about it, to do something in your own journey to reflect on this. Because most of us have some connection with self-worth being dependent on something external, how much we work, how much money we make, beauty, our relationships, if we're in one, whatever that means, if we have kids, or people pleasing. So I've already probably really blabbed for a long time, but I'm really grateful to be back having coffee with you guys. I didn't even take a sip of this. I must be all good on my caffeine right now. But I'm so grateful to be here, so grateful to engage. If you have a specific question or topic you'd love for me to cover, please put them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. And if you want to be connected with these conversations in the future, please subscribe. That means the world to me. And I hope to see you next time.